We are in the Community Development Standing Committee meeting for September 4th, 2018. As always, we start by welcoming you to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Do we have a motion for adoption of the agenda? Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have minutes from our previous meeting. Are there any errors or omissions on the meeting minutes from July 3rd committee meeting? Seeing none, I'll seek a motion to adopt the minutes from our previous meeting. Moved by Mayor Heinzman, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so our first order of business for today is our development projects update.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Velaniskis, Director of Community Planning. Council has the agenda item in front of you, and it looks like we have 4 new applications since our last meeting, and they're highlighted in green. 2 of them are delegated, so the first 2 items are both is a delegated development permit for combustion solutions, and then a temporary use permit application for the Backcountry Brewery. And then the second 2 would be coming to council at some point. It's the Waterfront Landing Phase 2 development permit for 130 townhouses, and also a variance permit application for a dispensary on 2nd Avenue. It's essentially where the Artisan Cafe used to be. Other than that, also in blue are the 4 priority projects that are highlighted, and at this point we don't, staff don't have any items to raise with council. However, we're here to answer any questions you may have.
All right, council, what's your pleasure? Let's start off with questions. Councilor Pryor.
Related to this, but not anything specific. I had someone send me a letter of their timeline. So someone comes in with a development, any one of these new ones, how long till they're getting their building permit, roughly?
So it depends
3
which
years?
It depends what application is it for, rezoning or a development permit?
Yeah.
Or
You said building permit.
Yeah, well, a rezoning and, like.
Councilor Pryor, do you have a sense of the scale project perhaps?
Well,
like how many units?
I mean, I don't want to be specific, of course, but I mean, someone came to me with a small 5-unit or 6-unit thing that they've been working on already for a year, and showed me the timeline from now till they got their building permit. And it was 2 more years. I just thought.
Oh, CAO has a comment on that.
Yeah, through the chair, I think if there's a question about a specific development, rather than speak about it publicly and there needs to be some follow-up, then that can come to me and we can provide the specific answers.
Well, that's why I didn't want to get specific.
And does...
But I mean, I was thinking, oh, well, that'll slow things down a little bit. A lot of people are talking about how fast we're growing, and if our process is taking a long time, that's going to slow things down, because development can't wait. And a lot of developers are not going to sit around and hold financing for 2 or 3 years. So I thought, I see it as a potential slowdown thing if we're getting that busy. I guess my question is, are we getting so busy that things are taking a long time?
Things are taking a bit longer for sure. Our general timeline, when people ask us about how long is a rezoning, it depends on the complexity of the rezoning, and it depends how fast the applicants can move with the rezoning. Often it's a lot of back and forth, and we have to wait months sometimes to get things back. But normally, it's for a medium-sized rezoning, we say it's at least a year. Sometimes it's more than that. And then the same thing for a development permit. It could be 6 months, but some development permits run up to a year. Again, if you look at rezoning to getting a development permit, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that it's going to be at least a year and a half to 2 years.
Great, thank you. Councillor Race and then Mayor Heinzman.
Thank you. With reference to the second one down, Commercial Way,
And that's an application for a TUP, and I'm wondering what is temporary about that? Is it time limited for some reason, or?
So the applicants, I believe, have applied for a 3-year term for a temporary use permit, and that would be for events to be held at the brewery. So temporary in the sense that the temporary use permit would eventually expire. I'm not sure whether what their ambitions are is for permanent or temporary purpose.
I ask that because we've gone through a series of these up at the regional district with different types of TEP applications, and speaking for myself, I sort of becoming a little less forgiving of them if they're just putting off zoning when they really should be applying for zoning. If there's something temporary about it, you can see kind of the light at the end of the tunnel already. You know it's for a couple of years and that'll be it. Or like we did it with the parking, for example, for the music festival. That to me is what a temporary use permit is for. And so I just make that comment when it comes to us that I personally don't like these things that kind of try and do an end run around a zoning application. I get the fact in some cases they want to see if it works or something like that, and so maybe a 1-year or 2-year trial period is it, but others, maybe not. Maybe they should just bite the bullet and apply for rezoning and do it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and in this case it may be related to their space restrictions. There may be an expansion plan, so in between that time, you know, there's a need for that added density of use.
Yeah, I generally concur with Councillor Chappelle on that, Councillor Race on that point. Apologies. So back to Councillor Pryor's question. He asked specifically about building permits, and I know we've had this conversation before about having a different process for step 9, or not step 9. What do they call them? Part 9. And how we can streamline that building code process within ourselves. So I know staff is working on something to come back in the next year to that effect, but I think that's really where it was. You know my opinion on this. I think we should be stepping out of some of these building code issues. This is a provincial function. These are provincially mandated standards. And where we can, particularly on multifamily and larger commercial, we should let someone else take on that liability and that risk. There's always going to be some dovetailing with our services that need our staff, but if we can minimize our staff's role in those, would help tremendously with a lot of the building permit processing. And I think that's where, I think people understand where rezonings have to go through the process, and sometimes it's very complex pieces of land. I think people understand development permit processes could be very complicated too. So I think you want to do your due diligence. You don't want to mess up there, and you need to make sure public consultation is part of that. And that sometimes that takes so long. But building permits, I think local government should be minimizing their need to do that, and ensuring that Part 9 are done by somebody else and have them take on the liability. So I think sooner that can come back to council, but sooner it will help some of the issues. That's what I was talking about.
On that,
specifically?
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought there was something in motion on that.
That's what I'm saying. There is.
That's right. We are planning to bring back a proposal. It will have some budgetary implications because we need to outsource that work. Somebody that could design the system for us to take. I think it's maybe part 3 buildings that we're talking about, the more complex
Whatever
buildings that would go through an independent review where the applicant hires essentially pays for that review function.
Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Chappelle.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Race, for starting with adversarial comments. I really appreciate that. On the rezoning, and yes, I disagree with Councillor Race. This zoning is because it's light industrial, and the reason we have to go through these temporary use permits is because of the zoning there in the entire district. The entire district has changed its use, and there's a lot of craft beverage facilities in the area that are all having difficulty with 30-person seating. Events, because we don't have any event spaces, are all being run out of our breweries. People are having their employment parties at these spaces, and if you have 30 people, you end up filling up the entire space and having them closed to the public. People are trying to expand their businesses in this area, and employment is growing in the sector. We need to support that. I really feel that the zoning should be it shouldn't be individuals coming. This district needs support for the employment that it helps our district with. It's high-level employment. I went to the Pride event at this particular unit, and they were turning people away like crazy, and it was the first Pride event in our district, and to watch people being turned away was incredibly disappointing, and know that it was because of our zoning in this area that we can't have these events that support diversity and inclusivity in our district. So it's not about a temporary use permit. It's about what is this area being used for? How do we support employment in the district? And how do we support a growing sector of craft industries in this region? And spot rezonings don't work. We end up dealing with this, and it takes staff time and resources. So I hope this temporary use permit actually becomes a proper rezoning in the district.
All right, I have myself on the list, and just to add to that, I agree, like that. I think actually a temporary use permit is a good way to act in a nimble way as a district, and I think backcountry in particular is demonstrative of a very successful business, and I think we as a district, we're doing whatever we can to get out of the way while still respecting our responsibilities vis-a-vis having a proper business park. But I think it's something that definitely we're going to need to grapple with as our business park sort of changes in its character. It's going to change given all the new type of construction that's going on, and maybe we need to take a look at the zoning and kind of looking at zoning for protecting existing uses that are very useful around sort of less sort of retail based, but like maintenance facilities, water service, those kinds of things, and then have another section where it's our emerging economy and have space for growth. So I think TUP is a good compromise at this point, but looking forward to seeing how we refine that further. So Councillor Kent and then Councillor.
Oh, thanks. Item 40, the Scott Crescent. It just says that the application is incomplete. I'm just wondering what we're missing on that.
So we received an application package, but it was missing a number of reports. I can't tell you exactly which reports are, but applicants are aware that it's incomplete, and my understanding is they're working on making sure it's all coming together at the same time. So there's a number of things that we're still missing.
Councillor Race.
Thank you. Just not to belabor this TUP issue, I'm not concerned about the types of events. Happy to see that kind of activity. I just question whether a TUP or rezoning is the better way to go, because TUP is limited. Eventually, if it works, you're going to have to bite the bullet and rezone it. So that's just my view on that. I put my hand up though for the 2nd Avenue marijuana dispensary issue and the potential variance. And I'm aware of another one that some might be aware of too. So, and I'm not flip-flopping in this issue. I know what you're saying or thinking. I voted against the rezoning because it was illegal. I didn't think we should zone things that were illegal. But now that it's becoming legal, I think, for me at least, that creates a different atmosphere. So I wonder about some of these limitations because it seemed to, I don't know where it originated. I first heard of it coming out of the city of Vancouver when they were trying to deal with this several years ago, and before we dealt with it, they had a 300-meter limit between different dispensaries, I think, and 300 meters between the dispensary and the school. And I'm wondering where that comes from, and is there a real rationale for that, and do we need to look at that? Because this is one application, there may be others, and should we just kind of consider whether these require some kind of special treatment, or are they like banks and drugstores and restaurants and let the market sort itself out? and just look at the, it's a general retail use. There's some areas that are good for retail, some areas that aren't. And do we have to get fussed about all these other things? So I just raised that as part of perhaps a larger discussion, because I don't think this will be the end of it. And whether we want to consider just, what is the rationale? Is there a real reason for having 300 meters between these different stores? Is there a real danger if we were only 200 meters from a school versus a liquor store being 100 meters from a school or 200 meters from a school or something like that? Is there really a rub off on the children like that? So I think this will be, it may be a part of a larger discussion, I guess is what I'm trying to highlight. And I think we're going to have to wrestle with this, and we might just consider doing it all at once.
Yeah, two things. On the TUP issue, I actually didn't hear, I actually think you guys were all agreeing. I think what Councillor Race was trying to say was if there's a rationale for a TUP, absolutely consider it. But if it really is a fundamental change you wanted to see in the rezoning, you should just rezone the whole area. So I think we're all agreeing on that. I generally agree with Councillor Race too on that particular last issue that he was talking about. I suspect there's all sorts of little aspects of the cannabis bylaws that are going to be very much organic, and you're going to want to revisit a whole bunch of them as society gets to understand exactly the impacts or the not impacts. So I really just see that our current bylaws is just the first step, and that likely they're going to need to be massaged and changed over the next coming years. Particularly as the feds actually start to roll out other pieces of legislation over in a year from now or 2 years from now.
Thank you. Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, well, on the TUP, I mean, so here's the brew pub, or the brew outfit in the business park needs a temporary use permit. The marijuana guy needs a temporary use permit. We haven't directed staff to do anything. So when Doug says maybe we should be looking at the whole marijuana issue, I don't agree. I think we'll just take them one at a time. Otherwise, you can imagine how much work that's going to be to pull all our marijuana rules off and rehash it at this point. At this point being September in our final term. Because, you guys might be able to do something next term, but I won't. And so, but does that mean that we are looking at the brewing place in the business park? They've applied for a temporary use permit because they're breaking the law right now. So that makes them legit.
My understanding is that they want to have more capacity within their space. I think the problem right now is the existing zoning only allows a certain amount, and so it's keeping their business from expanding.
Okay, because
Is that correct, Seth?
I think it's in the ballpark. It is, they're holding events that exceed the capacity of the building, and so it is to allow for that.
So on that issue, we wouldn't necessarily look at rezoning that whole end of town because of that. So rezoning, like Doug said, probably makes, what's the temporary thing for?
Okay, I think we've all gotten our opinions out on that one, and we have Councillor Chappelle.
I'll point out the 1.5 year wait list for rezoning and DPs. So if we are going to, a temporary use permit gets us to the rezoning, as Councillor Blackman will said, so I think it is an amazing way to get us there and to direct staff to look at that area as comprehensive. But there's a cidery that just opened in there as well that is having the exact same issues. They're turning people away at the door, and they're, it's expensive opening these facilities. And, as we get more and more of this use, we have to definitely adjust our zoning bylaws to allow for what the economy is delivering, as Councillor Race put it. And I feel the same way about the Second Avenue permit as well. Is maybe our marijuana bylaws will need adjusting, and Mayor Heinzman said it well, is that we're going to have to see with the feds and how these marijuana bylaws and laws provincially and federally roll out. And we may have to look at opening up our marijuana bylaws and removing some of the restrictions so that we can allow expansion of our economy if that's a sector that's going to grow in town.
Thank you. Okay, any other new comments on development projects, recognizing that we're already behind on our agenda, so. Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, just the one, this side of the railroad tracks. No, yes. On Buckley. The
Jamar.
big one, the
Jamar.
big, long piece of
Gateway?
property.
Gateway.
Yeah.
Oh, the gateway.
Oh,
So yes, nothing new, we just haven't heard any, like, it's been with the applicant for a very long time now. And it seems that the application has sort of.
well, I understand there was
Sitting at
a,
third reading stuff?
Yes, yeah,
it got third reading?
it did.
That was
Last
4
year.
years.
I thought there were some land issues, ownership things going on
Was it
there.
right away through?
There's railway.
It's in applicant's hands.
There are some issues with land ownership and a road right away, but in terms of from the land use perspective, I think we were, the last communication was on the housing agreement, and we've provided our comments on the housing agreement, and we've just never heard back.
All right, so with that, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the revitalization tax exemption bylaw. Another council favorite. They're all favorite.
Thank you, Chair, Council, committee members. Just in terms of a brief update on the revitalisation tax exemption bylaw that we have. The only one we currently have in place right now is on the ocean front. That runs from January 1st, 2016 through to the end of 2025, and we have 0 applications on that through the 3 years to date. There have been none this year. You need to submit a building permit. So that bylaw has 0 right now, and we'll have none for this tax year. So there isn't a lot to report in terms of the ocean front. In terms of the downtown and the business park RTE, that was effective through to the end of August of 2017. So it's been inactive or ineligible to take new applications for the last year. There were, I think the 4 years that it was eligible to accept applications, we received 5 and approved 5. So we have 5 tax certificates that exempt the new assessment that's created on those parcels. 4 of them are on Queensway, one is downtown. We did a quick review. Over the 4 years, we've forgiven or the tax exemptions been to a tune of $312,000 over the 4 years. So a little over $100,000 a year in foregone assessment and foregone. I'm sorry?
Little under, so.
75.
Yes, you're right. Sorry, my math. The reason I'm not CFO. Yeah, so it would be around $80,000 a year in foregone assessment and taxation. There will be no more applications for those. That has ceased. It's ended. We can't take any more absent another bylaw. And it would be the last year of eligibility. So after this year, that will be winding down. So that really is the summary. In terms of new applications beyond what we'd received up until last year, nothing new in the oceanfront, and that's the only RTE bylaw we have active right now.
Mayor Heisen.
Yeah, just to clarify in my mind, so the downtown one was a 5-year period, but it didn't necessarily diminish over that 5-year period. So there's one more year of tax exemption, and then everyone's paying.
Yeah. Is the certificates endure 5 years from signing?
That's right,
Oh, okay. My mistake. So.
Oh, it is 5 years from signing.
from signing.
That's
So-
right, but the oceanfront one, it's a 10-year period, but it diminishes by a year every year, so it's not,
Correct. Yes.
yeah, so they were differently formulated. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. I think I might have made it less clear, I'm sorry.
So we're essentially a third of the way through that bylaw in terms of its effectiveness.
Yeah, so there's only 7 years left in theory. And doesn't it diminish percentage-wise over that time too?
I don't recall that detail of the bylaw.
Don't believe so, I
Review
did.
it again, but it was definitely restricted on years.
I thought it was restricted on years and it,
I don't think so.
well, maybe it
So it's
was
for-
an iteration that we never.
It ceases December 31st, 2026, so if you apply in 2025, you'll get a year's worth of exemptions.
Oh, was it, that's the limitation.
Yeah. Yeah, Councillor Pryor.
And that's commercial, not residential, right?
Commercial,
Yeah.
industrial and non-residential.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to the next item of the agenda, which is Buckley Avenue Development Proposal.
There we go. So, thank you, Chair, and members of the committee. Gary Buxton, I should have introduced myself. Gary Buxton, General Manager here. I'll give you an update. Natasha Golbeck, Senior Director. We'll give you an update on where we've been at with the Buckley Avenue Affordable Rental Housing Project. In terms of a history, this started out with initial council direction in May of last year, and we subsequently made a grant application to BC Housing in December of last year, and that was under the Community Partnership Initiative, so the CPI program that was in operation at that time. We were successful. We got $145,000 out of that, and subsequently an additional $50,000 out of CMHC under the seed funding, both to advance this project in its design. We engaged a project manager in June 28th following an RFP, and no sooner than we'd done that than BC Housing advised that we had to reapply under a different program, and that's the Community Housing Fund. So we've effectively been treading some of the same ground that we have before, but we've been adding considerable more detail and knowledge around this site. The grant application deadline is September 17th, so we were fairly tight on time. So this was really the only meeting we had at which to give Council and Committee an update. In terms of the recent work, all of this work that we've been doing, from the additional architectural work, needs assessment through to civil engineering reviews and traffic assessment, it's really been around reducing risk on the site and knowing what we're dealing with. Particularly with respect to geotechnical investigations, what dirt do we have to deal with? That seems to be ordinary. There's nothing extraordinary about the site from a geotech point of view. Riparian areas, we've sort of deemed where those setbacks are and where we can and can't go along the site. And the flood hazard evaluation is underway. Civil engineering wise, there doesn't seem to be anything really tricky around getting water in and sewer out. So in terms of where we're at, we are at a 76 apartment unit building, 5 stories, 12 studio units, 350 square feet on average, 48 one-bedroom and 16 two-bedroom that are in the 500 to 700 plus square feet. And those are standards that essentially are not dictated perhaps by BC Housing, but those are what they expect applications to meet. So there's storage space, bicycle parking, a youth hub, which Natasha will describe in a while, public washroom space that can serve the skate park, which is staying, 95 vehicle parking stalls, and we're targeting right now the step 4 under the BC Building Step Code, or passive home equivalent. That's what BC Housing wants to see in its applications.
Good, because that's what we want to see.
So that's the current site plan. We're at now a single building. Previously, when you saw it, there were 72 apartment units and 8 townhouse units. Those are gone. It's a little tricky to see, and I don't know if the cursor will show up. Probably not. No. But it's towards the back of the site. The community park is the green area that sort of fronts onto Buckley. That'll be publicly available, publicly developed park. and then surface parking under the building and sort of in front of the building, although that darker green riparian area will be untouched. So it's not going to be hanging right over Buckley. There's going to be a lot of trees left on site, both front and back. Skate park remains where it is essentially. That's the ground floor. You can see the parking, minor office areas, entrance to the building. The pink purple area at the back or the top is the indoor storage and bike parking, and the green is youth hub. The ground floor we can't use for residential purposes because of the flood hazard, so we're left with public or institutional uses. So the idea that the youth hub might sort of replace in whole or in part what's at the youth centre, which is sort of that building's past prime, is one of the ideas that we're working with. Floors 2 through 5, the light blue are the studio units, the yellow mustardy colour are the 1 bedroom, and the blue on the end of the 2 bedroom units. So that mimics its way up through floors 2 through 5. And opposite there are laundry facilities at just where the elevators are. Those are the boxes with the X in the middle of the building where the knuckle is. And then there are storage spaces and utility spaces as well in that part of the building. Rents, part of the program, the Community Housing Fund program, which is what we're reapplying under, is 20% have to be deep subsidy, 50% rent geared to income, 30% moderate income and affordable market. So those are the rents ranging from $375 for a deep subsidy studio unit up to $1,440 for a 2-bedroom sort of modest market, affordable market rental rate.
Sorry, just a question on that table there. Is there an error around the actual numbers of the units? Because it's saying 32 studio units, but you actually want
correct.
12, right?
That should be 12.
And then the 24 is also now 48?
Yes.
Just making sure.
Yeah, sorry, those rents haven't changed, but the unit mix has. This is a bit of a work in progress. We are still working on this application, and some of the numbers are moving some of the numbers moved again this morning. But those rents are not going to change. What does change is the gross revenue that you get out of the building, which we'll come back to. But in terms of previously when we'd reapplied under the CPI program, that was a modest market building, entry level, and we were looking at rents that started at $990 and went up to $2,250. Now that $2,250 was for the townhouse units, but you can see that the rents this time are substantially lower, particularly in the rent geared to income and the deep subsidy. We are talking true affordability rather than last time it was affordable in relation to the market. Now we're into true affordability. The capital cost all in is 30 million. The cost of construction is about 20 million. So the net capital cost and the gross capital cost does differ because there's a $100,000 per unit grant that BC Housing provides. So the net capital cost is a fair deal less than the 30, but essentially what we're talking about is a $20 million build. That's quite an increase from last time, which was around 16 million, but what we've included now are more up-to-date square foot construction costs and some healthy contingencies, both for uncertainty and time. Both we know by the time we get to a construction decision, if we get to a construction decision, costs would have gone up, and we know that costs are going to go up anyway. So there's a healthy contingency in that 20 million. But I say what those rents do, what the cost of construction and then the rent revenue, what that does mean is that we have an annual operational deficit of over $600,000 or about $700 a unit, which we didn't have last time. It netted out last time. But when you press the rents down into that affordable level, this is the deficit that you get. So the application is going in with an operational grant request, and the program is set up to do that. So, timeline, grant application is coming right up. We expect a decision in Q4. on that grant application. The project design, if we're successful, goes through Q1 through Q3 of next year. What BC Housing calls a final project commitment issued for construction drawings. We go out to tender is Q3 of 2019. We start thereafter and build through 2020 through to 2021, and targeting occupancy in early 2021. The commitments that we're making as part of the application are the lands themselves. The 150 for the park is already in our capital plan and the financial plan. That's something we're going to do regardless of whether this project proceeds, but it makes some sense to run them in parallel. The staff time, principally it's myself, Dave Marrow and Natasha that right now are working on this project. We're pulling in Ms. Matthews as needed on financial issues, other engineers and real estate as needed. Waiver of the rezoning fee, which were already passed, the development permit fee, building permit fee and development cost charges, all of which we have existing policy or bylaw around dealing with those sorts of waivers, and we'll deal with those when we actually have a development permit or building permit application. The application, the grant application requires a housing needs assessment. So again, we've trodden back over that territory and provided some more details. So in quick summary, over 700 households currently pay more than 30% of their income on rent. So that's basically, where we're at right now. We've already got a large number of households that could use some help. The projected new demand is over 100 new core housing units, over 100 new missing middle income units, and over 320 market rental units. So doing that math is we're up over 1,000 households of one form now or in the near future that need help with housing, which isn't a surprise. I mean, that really reaffirms what we already knew. Rental vacancy rate's been at or near zero for the best part of 3 years now. There's a critical need for about 500 new affordable housing units, so 80 isn't going to tip the scales. It's unlikely that we're going to affect community vacancy rates with 80 units. If we're going to put 800 on, then I'd have some concerns, but it's 80. So I think the demand for it is going to be fairly robust. The design rationale, we think an apartment building addresses that sort of low income, middle income gap. We think that addressing that is best through an apartment building, and there are other projects in the community, such as the Under One Roof project, which is imminently breaking ground, that should deal with the transitional emergency part of the spectrum, and the Seniors Home Society application, which is pending before council. That can address the need for affordable seniors projects. Studio market units are technically affordable if you can find one. I mean, the prices are right, but the supply is incredibly low. So we've maximised the number of units really in 1 and 2 bedrooms, and I think there are a limited number of studio units. So we're really trying to target the design rationale around the need. Now the youth hub?
Yeah, I'll just take over for a second. The youth hub that's proposed in this building provides us a bit of an opportunity to work with our partners in the community who provide youth services or have an interest in youth wellness. Sea to Sky Community Services Society obviously holds our contract for the youth center currently, as well as the school liaison, the school district, MCFD, Child Need Mental Health, and others. So we'd really like to convene a bit of a planning process around this to say, what should this space look like? How do we optimally serve the needs of the youth in the community? And how do we coordinate with our partners to make sure that everybody's providing services across the continuum to meet all the youth needs, and so that there's no sort of gaps or overlaps and so on. So we intend to, should this project go forward, hold a bit of a planning process with a multi-stakeholder table around that. We'll certainly work within our existing resource pool for youth services and coordinate with other concurrent planning processes like Brennan Park and so on. So we're imagining that what this will look like from a service perspective in the youth hub is counseling, primary care, outreach, recreation programming to build resilience, these kinds of services. But what exactly that'll look like will be determined. And the capital costs for the fit out will be provided by the agencies who end up being part of the space. So we'll negotiate that as we move down the field.
That list.
I can take questions now, because I've got another 7 slides. So
Okay, yeah,
if
maybe
you want
we'll
to take a bit of a break.
take a
Come back.
bit of a break. And so, just before we get to the questions, so my understanding from the presentation that essentially what has changed from the previous iteration is that the provincial government has a new program through which they're basically going to put, if they approve the project, put more funding so that it can be lower cost units. Would that be a fair assessment? Like they're gonna provide an operational subsidy. So, you know, it is operating at a deficit, but that's deficit is covered by the province and not by the district.
That is correct, yes.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Schwab.
Thanks. So I like this a lot more than I liked the previous rendition of this, but as I've said, I'm really not a fan of underplanned, researched, or prepared grant applications, and I know this has been in a hurry for elections. We definitely, it's not about whether I appreciate having this type of housing. I know there's a desperate need for this housing. My problem has always been the cost and our ability to manage the project. The operating, you know, in the absence of policy we don't have housing policy, we end up building projects that address 70 units instead of having a comprehensive housing plan that covers our entire district and brings in units with every project that is managed by the market or managed by other people.
So actually, sorry, I just, maybe I should have been more clear. We want to go first round, let's go for questions because we haven't gone through the whole presentation. So try and keep it confined to questions, and then at the very end, we'll go roundtable.
So my question would be the history of this land. This land was given, basically we rezoned it to take in this land as a municipality in order to have green space and access to riparian areas for Howe Sound. Howe Sound originally being our school district being right next door. This land was rezoned, and I haven't really heard any history of this land, of why it was brought into the municipality. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that history. And then I'd like to understand, Councillor Buckley actually pretty much addressed the question, but the deficit, the ongoing deficit, is that a long-term funding that, so we won't go into deficit and the district is not paying for the $630,000 a year in market rents, and it's not all the units, the other units in the, so we have core units, which is great. I appreciate that much more, that we are addressing core housing needs, and then middle income units. And the difference, is there any way that we could split the difference? Is that a possibility so that there isn't such a massive deficit if the rents go a little bit higher, or if there's some way that we can manage splitting the difference so it's not such a deficit, unless it's 100% covered in infinitum?
So
Staff?
the answer to the first question is yes, the application is seeking an operational grant. We're not making an application to say we're going to cover any of that $630,000 annual deficit. We didn't get into that to burden the taxpayer with that sort of. So no, the application is seeking an operational grant to cover the shortfall. The types of units are specified quite clearly in the CHF program. Will BC Housing be willing to renegotiate some of those? Possibly, we don't know, but not as part of the grant application. They're not entertaining any changes to that or any, I mean, the questions that have gone in about that have said make your application based on the program as it's presented. Whether or not they'll allow that as part of an partner agreement or an operating agreement with the district or whoever we get to run the building, and that's the intent. They may, as a means of reducing the operational deficit, allow that to happen. But at this point in time, they're telling us your best application is the one that fits the CHF
Thank you.
parameters.
Yeah,
It's-
and on that though, like, but in my mind, if the province is stepping up with the grant, then we wouldn't want to reduce the amount of that grant, because then we'd be taking on more risk if we have more, like, market units, right? Because those ones, if they're vacant, then we're not getting any revenue, whereas a rent geared to income or other one, deep core need, we know those are never going to be vacant, they're operated in perpetuity with the grant, so just want to make that clear.
There's one number discrepancy. In the grant application, it said the land is worth 1.8, and in the presentation, it says the land is worth 1.2. Which number is that? I just want to make sure that the grant is accurate.
Sorry, it's 1.2.
Okay, in our grant application, it says 1.8. So we'll need to adjust that number.
That's either,
Page 27.
that's likely a typo. Again, that document is changed twice in the last 2 days. So.
Yeah, that is,
It's a typo, it's 1.2.
Perfect, thank you. And do you mind if I ask one more? You didn't answer the history of the land and why it was granted to.
Do we have that information today?
I do not have the history,
Okay.
other than I know that it was acquired as a sponsored Crown grant, and the reverter must be used for municipal purposes. That's the limit of my history on this one.
Ongoing funding for management? Ongoing funding for management.
That's
of the-
included in the operational budget.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor
Perfect.
Rice.
Thank you. So this grant is for about 1.2 million, give or take, for soft costs and detailed engineering and so forth.
Oh, sorry, no, what we anticipate is that BC Housing will give a successful applicant enough to advance the money, enough to advance the design to the issuance of tender drawings, issued for construction drawings. You're ready to break ground. I mean, we're not ready to break ground, we have some nice pictures and some good numbers. But they're not going to advance the 20 million construction.
No, I wasn't expecting that, but when I read through it, I got the impression that what we were actually applying for now was funding for the detailed design work. And I thought that was $1 million and change. Maybe I misread that.
You make the grant application for the project in its entirety. The way it tends to work out is the funding comes in bits and pieces. They don't approve green light your project and say, here's $20 million, have at it. You're green lighted, but to get to the next stage of design.
And it won't be competitive again.
Okay, but my question really was with this first advance for design, is if we decide at the end of the day not to go ahead with this, because we're not making a construction decision now, what happens to that? Do we have to repay it or not? And I got the impression from the report it could go either way, because unless I misunderstood the report, the CFO considers this to be a liability of the district. I believe the report said that. And then there was a question of whether or not it would ever have to be repaid. So whatever that number is, getting us to the design, to the construction drawing stage, is that something that we might have to repay? Ever?
Yeah, I wonder if maybe most of these questions have actually got, so maybe what I should do is run through the rest of the,
Sure, I'll
and then I can,
you want?
And maybe we'll just park that and I'll ask the other people on the speakers list, Mayor Heinzman, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Pryor, did you have anything
I have
that
a
was?
specific question.
Yeah, so we'll go Mayor Heinzman.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Gary, you said, and the report indicates this too, that the park wouldn't be done until the development of this was going. And I know we've had money in 2 budgets now for a park there. I think the park is long overdue in dent though. Is there a way to move the park forward sooner rather than later for that neighborhood?
yes, we would anticipate doing it next year once site clearing is, and we can even advance that portion of the site. All we really need to do is get a preliminary landscape concept done for the entire site, and then we can get going on the park. The park does not have to wait for that timeline that I showed you.
Councillor Elliott?
Thank you. So under this program, will BC Housing not entertain any market rent to help subsidize the deeply subsidized units? I know there's projects in other municipalities where they've actually included all 4, and then the market rent helps subsidize the deeper rent, so then the operating rent is less over time. But is that not part of this program?
Yeah, they may. We can discuss that. I think for the other categories of rents, the other unit types, the deep subsidy and the RGI, there's specified rental tables, right? Like that are even determined regionally, so we don't have any flexibility in those. But if we wanted to add a 4th category of tenancy in order to offset the level of subsidy, I'm sure they would have that conversation with us, and so the objective of that would be so that we are more competitive in our bid. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if that
Yeah.
makes us more competitive by having a lower operating need, or whether that makes us less competitive because they really
Because
just
we're outside of
want
the
to
program.
focus
Yeah.
on this program. So
Yeah.
I
My
don't
gut
know
is
the
that
answer to
that's the case, is that they've asked us to put forth the program that they've.
My second question is on the youth hub, and when youth will be involved in the conversation.
We are waiting for this step and to submit our application. Once we get notice about how our application for the program has fared, then we'll start having one-on-one conversations, get a sense of where everybody's at and what the different agencies' plans are, and then bring everybody together for a conversation later in the fall.
Youth, not adults who work with youth, but youth. And the reason I bring that up is because at our World Cafe at the beginning of our term, and also in the report card that the youth engagement team just delivered to us, they said that they're having a problem with the youth center, not because it doesn't offer recreational programming, but because there's stigma associated with the people who go there need help. So it's not necessarily easy for kids to all use it because it still has this stigma associated with it, rightly or wrongly, but that's what teens are telling us. So I think we just have to be mindful that it's not just about sitting down with the agencies, but the youth voice actually really needs to be there to help the adults understand whether youth will actually use that as a recreation center, if they're using it as a wellness, primary care, counseling center. And I think that's a really important question for us to ask, because we may still need to figure out the broader concept for youth recreation in the district with the youth hub. So I just don't want, if we're successful, that conversation to get lost, because I think that voice would be, I don't want to build another youth center that youth won't use.
I 100% agree. I think those are really good points, and similar to what we heard from the youth, that they often won't go to Brennan Park because that's seen as a place for children, right? And so we actually don't understand that as grown-ups, how to manage that. And so engaging with the youth, I think all different kinds of youth also, and to make sure that we're hitting the target populations the way that we need to. But yeah, point really taken. Thanks.
All right, Councilor Pryor, that was.
Yeah, so we'll just touch on the youth center. It doesn't necessarily mean the other one's being torn down. This one, what I heard. But on the grant that we're getting, it sounds to me like we're getting a grant, and I don't know if we need to add another tier, because what we're after is affordable housing. I don't think we need to add market housing in it to try and myself, because we want 80 affordable units or 60 affordable units. We want the 80. But the grant thing, are they saying, okay, it's gonna get built, there's reduced rents on some of these, so we'll cover the extra so that you guys can cover your mortgage. So our mortgage is pretty much guaranteed. They're gonna chip in money to help run the thing, and at the end of 25 years, it's owned by the district.
Yes, yes. There were a lot of questions in there. We're not 100% certain that we're going to get this with this grant.
Yeah.
But yeah, our application clearly is that these are the rents you want. These are the rents we can offer. This is the operational deficit that results. You need to fund that, because we're not funding that.
So
that's good. That's what I heard.
I just want to inject a little political commentary into this because my other job is also working in provincial government, and my sense of the new housing program is that it's actually a vast improvement because in the previous administration there was a high expectation that mostly the market would take care of it as well as nonprofit organizations, and so the risk was shouldered by those two organizations. My understanding of the new program is that it's more about the province taking back some of that responsibility and some of that risk, but still being in partnership with local government. So that's, obviously we have to look at all of the details, and, staff will do due diligence around operating agreements and things of that nature, but make no mistake, this is actually a net improvement. We're gonna get way more affordable units than we had before. And I think, that's where we're going. Just on this, you get the last word.
Thanks. I have one more question just on, bringing up the point, and Natasha, thanks for you mentioned before that it was going to be a robust engagement, and I look forward to staff running a robust engagement with the youth and members of the community that are interested in the youth hub. I'm still worried about management fees in the long term, and Tracy brought up a great point that it's based on political capital. And my long-term worry is that we get a government that changes and pulls back on programming and says we're not going to fund, and then the taxpayer is left on the hook. And it is based on the programs that this government has in place, which are definitely more robust. I also wonder, because of that, if we could add an extra floor of density in order to put in, currently it's at 5 floors, that land is C4. If it's zone C4, then it's zone zone residential. If we could have density bonusing on our own projects and include everything that we need for the grant application, but also include a level of market housing that could subsidize the units in the long term. And if we're thinking about that at all, if that's a possibility to add market rental units in the same, we all know that having projects with just one income level in that tend not to do as well as mixed income projects. And if that's possible to include that in our application, I think it'd be a more robust financial model to be able to density bonus our own property. I'm not sure if that's something that's possible with BC Housing, but it seems like a better long-term management. You could even pay for management fees.
Okay, so in terms of management fees, those should be covered by the operating agreement. I mean, we're not going to enter into this without an operating agreement, which should specify how both the capital funding is coming and the operating funding. Right now we're asking for it all. So that should be dealt with through the operating agreement. We could slap another story on this. The difficulty is the sites, we have the height. My recollection is the height would allow us to build another story. That's going to lead us into a development, a DVP, because I think the height limit now is 5 stories, not 6. So 5 stories plus a certain height, we can get the other story in. The difficulty again is the parking's maxed out on site right now, so now we'll be into a height variance and a parking variance.
Oh, we need some parking.
Okay. So I have myself and I have Mayor Hanksman. I was just going to say though that my understanding of the way the project is this is actually probably going to be the most diverse socioeconomic building in the district because it has Gurney, it has RGI, which is sort of in the middle, and then it has Modest Market. There's no other building in town that does that. And those are people from very different walks of life. And so actually, I'm a little bit less concerned about that. And I'm more concerned about any uncertainty at this point in the process when you inject a fully market-based part of the project, because the expectations are different in terms of profit margins and building finishings and where's the laundry, who's going to do the laundry, is it separate entrances, it opens up a whole can of worms. And to me, in terms of the actual layout of the site, I think it's actually very smart to do it in one building right now, because 10 years from now, when we have other funding or other projects, some of that surface parking could be converted for other uses. And so I commend the design. I really like the revised design and where it's gone. It's going to give us a lot of options for the future.
I just want to add one point of clarity, that the operating agreement will match the length of the mortgage. So in terms of the political piece, I think they do that on purpose.
Excellent, thank you.
That makes sense.
Gary and Natasha answered the points I was going to answer.
Fantastic. Okay, we'll let them finish their
Reserve my comments
presentation.
till the end.
6 more slides.
Just in terms of the ongoing housing work that's happening in parallel, that's through Macola, who we've been working with for the last 2 years. So they're currently working on organisational choice. How do we want to operationalise the housing function? And that's through a corporation society or through a partnering agreement. That's coming to you shortly. There's a chance it may come to you before the election. So that'll give us a long-term choice. We're also probably going to have to make a decision on a partnering agreement for Buckley, because the money has to flow to someone who can hold the mortgage, and that creates real issues for the district because of long-term borrowing. So the Buckley project, this project's probably going to have its own partnering agreement with someone, just because of the timelines being compressed by the grant application and the timeline. But the Macola also working on a perpetually affordable housing bylaw that will set affordability standards, eligibility requirements for municipal projects, and then a comprehensive affordable housing policy. So there's a bunch of work going off in the background. But I say, in terms of organisation and operationally, we are making this application with the statement that we are going to be entering an agreement with an operating entity. You'll see it listed as that throughout the application. Finding someone to run the building for us. And all of that's costed as part of the operation budget. So the work conducted to date has come from the PDF and the seed funding. The CHF funds, the community housing funds, we've been advised, and this goes to Councillor Race's question, they're being advanced on the same premise as the previous PDF funds, that are not repayable unless we halt the project. Now there's some question that Ms. Matthews and I have been kicking around. The ministry is sort of taking the stance that the money they're going to forward to us doesn't constitute borrowing, and that we can do that without any sort of having to do any financial workaround or deal with this as part of a call on our resources. That may be possible. We're just not quite sure right now, and it may depend on the amount. If they advance us $5 million, that's entirely different than if they advance us 1 or 1.2 million. We think that's we can likely handle that. I don't know if Ms. Matthews.
Sure, I might be able to sort of fill in why I gave you the information I did. Right now, they consider these promissory notes to be agreements under a liability. So essentially leading to a liability rather than capital borrowing. And so that gives us a different legislation to work under. In doing the numbers for this, we have about a $2.2 million grace period under regulation in terms of when we can get a liability without having to go out for public process. And so as long as this grant falls under that threshold in regulation, and with the assumption that this is call on demand, so within the next 5 years, we are making the leap here that this would be considered a liability and that we would be within our purview to go ahead and sign that. I did send this off to the ministry on Friday just to verify that they're still taking that stance. Before we were talking about $145,000, which falls well within our short-term borrowing requirements and well within all the things that could, even on a borrowing, would allow us to go without a public process. 1 million would require us to go for a public process if indeed they consider this promissory note to be borrowing instead. So we're just need to solidify that with them. Their stance last time was it was a liability, not a capital borrowing. If that's the same stance, we should be good to go.
So it's all good until the accountants get involved.
Yeah.
Just send the money. We'll spend it. Don't worry. Implications on
Says
this.
the guy who can't divide by 4.
I can spend it, I just can't add it up. So there's been some considerable staff time required and will continue to be. I say we have an ad hoc steering committee. Ms. Ms. Golbeck, myself, and Mr. Marrow are sort of shepherding this thing through. We're bringing in everybody else as we need to, that we're not having them sit at the table all the time. We're going to continue to work with our partners on the Youth Hub, Cedar Sky, the school district, and VCH. I say we've just dealt with the final project commitment, and once we get to construction financing, we are going to have to resolve that organisational options work. We want to, frankly, we want that thing resolved way before we get to that point. We don't want to be doing an operating agreement at the last minute, so we're going to be working on, as soon as we get, if the grant comes through, we'll be working on finding an operating entity. We have to, the timelines are such that we just have to get going on that. So there's going to be a fair amount of work on the organisational options. Where to from here? Next step, submit the grant application. Hopefully we get 1.1 to 1.2 million. That'll get us the further planning and design. So we've dealt with how the funds can be managed. We'll then work towards construction drawings and tender packages, which you can then submit to BCH for final project commitment. And at final project commitment, it's a similar decision point for council. We'll be having this conversation again with, hey, this is our capital budget, it's fixed, these are our tender documents. We're green lighted and we're ready to go. But I say if there's no funds, there's no project, and there'll be no need to refund BCH if they cancel the project at the final project commitment stage.
Yeah, through the chair, I just wanted to clarify, I didn't finish off the thought process, I should have, I'm sorry. But just on that note, the council should be really clear that they would want to advance this project, obviously, if they do get the funds through BC Housing, because otherwise we are on the hook for $1 million. We would then likely have to either find a reserve to fund that $1 million, or we would have to, assuming it was spent, or we would have to go to borrowing, and at that point we would have to go for an AAP, etc., and it's kind of after the fact then. So I think council really wants to make pretty comfortable with the thought process that they would advance this project if they are successful.
Understood.
So we've been working under these objectives and these sort of strategic directions is to increase the supply and availability of affordable housing across the spectrum. Focusing our direct action on the missing middle and affordable rental and modest market segments. It just so happens through this grant application we've been able to push that far lower than we've typically done in the past or when the project was last seen by council. And I say we intend to utilise an arm's length entity or organisation to administer that programme. It's not going to be Natasha and I running the room. Don't want to get into that business. So that's really the summary of that. I have a source for your questions.
All right, we're going to take them all. Questions, comments?
Start typing them in.
Let's try and finish before 3 o'clock. Who's that first? Councillor Rich.
Yeah, I'm untabling myself, I got tabled last round.
That's right.
So I think you've answered my question about the first advance. We make this application more or less now or before mid-September. And if it's successful, we'll get a grant for give or take $1 million for design and planning work. If we made a decision not to go ahead, then that's repayable by the district. And so that decision, we haven't, that decision down the road, I mean, if costs ballooned out of pocket or went sort of too far, or council just had a change of direction, that could be a significant liability for the district. So the key decision then is not necessarily today, it's when the grant might be approved, whether to accept those funds or not. And that's the point where we have to say this is a go or no-go deal. Am I correct in saying that? So, more or less?
Correct, yeah.
Otherwise, we risk not or having to repay that money. So I guess...
Oh, I think we have a little bit
Sorry,
of clarification.
I'm probably the only one not
and-
getting it
and
right now, but-
I'm the same way because,
Okay.
and I'm going to take the floor here and say my understanding was that, yeah, it's only if the council of the day decides not to. Is that correct, Ms. Matthews?
Sorry, Gary.
No, it's fine.
So just for clarity, because I wasn't 100% sure I understood what Councillor Race was getting at. We're putting the grant in and we would be hoping to accept $1 to $1.2 million, and they're going to do the next stage in this to make sure it's feasible for everybody involved. If after that feasibility, going to construction, BC Housing says, yeah, we're on board, we like it, we'll grant you we're going to come with the subsidies and everything, we're good to go, and we say, whoa, wait a minute, now that we've seen everything, we don't like it, we would be on the hook for $1 million, as I understand it.
Yes.
So I just want to make sure that's really clear.
I think that's what Councillor Race was saying.
Just to continue on, so I'm trying to look at the end game. If this goes through successfully, in the report it talks about a total cost possibly of 30.3 million, but a construction cost of 20.27 million. So I'm wondering what the other 10 million is. Is there a short answer to that? I've got about 3 questions now.
Well, all of the construction would exclude some of the soft costs. I mean, you get to that gross $30 million capital budget by including, it includes the $1.2 million worth of district land. It includes all of those. It includes the 150,000 for Denville Park. It includes all of the fee waivers. Plus, it also includes the grant that BC Housing of 100,000 a unit. So there's 8.2 million.
So basically, it's the net construction cost after we take into account donated land, in-kind services, grants of various nature. It is the total construction value all in for this project is 30 million, but by the time smoke clears, it'll be a $20 million borrowing. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
So in the grant then, of part of that give or take $10 million difference, those two numbers, is the grant of 100,000 per unit, which at 76 units is 7.6 million.
Correct. Yes.
And so that leaves us then to finance 20.27 million, presumably by mortgage. And if it was the district, it would go through MFA. But if we transfer it to some other entity, so that it's not on our books, then they're going to probably CMHC or BC Housing or somebody like that.
That's
Okay. And that's the number, it's the interest on that 20.27 that's worked into the operating cost.
Yes.
So with that type of mortgage, then it's obviously not going to go to the regular commercial market. That's a 25-year term, in effect.
What's the fine? Is it the BC? What's their financing?
CMH.
No, it's BCH, I think, doesn't go through housing. Essentially, I believe BC Housing works with another financing organization to do it, but BC Housing backstops and guarantees it. If this is similar to the old programs that I used to work in all the time. So they would backstop the mortgage, and essentially they subsidize and help the project until it becomes self-sufficient. So when that mortgage payment drops off, it becomes self-sufficient, all the operating subsidies drop off, they no longer have to fund it, they just expire. So that's when everything works out again.
No, understood. So between now and the completion of this project, we're not just looking for an operating partner who's going to manage the day-to-day. We're also looking for an ownership entity because we'll actually transfer the title to them
On a long-term lease.
on a long-term
Yeah.
lease.
We continue to hold title. We're not selling the land.
Okay, so that means we're going to be signing the mortgage.
No.
No, we can't.
Why not?
Without creating.
Well, that was my
Huge
point.
liability.
So the owner of land always has to sign a mortgage, unless you're just mortgaging the leasehold interest. And anyway, I don't want to get too technical here, but that means then the mortgage is non-recourse to the district. In other words, they couldn't sue the district for any deficiency in that mortgage. They foreclosed the land, take it away from us, payments weren't made,
So
but they wouldn't look to us for any deficiency. And those exist. But that's the kind of scheme we're talking about. So the district will continue as the owner. Somebody will come in as an operator. The mortgage will be there, registered against the land, because that's what a mortgage is. typically signed by the landowner, because you're creating an interest in land. And BC Housing, in effect, is going to guarantee repayment of that mortgage. And it would be non-recourse to the district. They could never sue the district for it.
That is
Because
why-
otherwise it's a liability, I think.
My understanding is it's meant to operate exactly the same way that under one roof. Whereas we have a long-term lease and an operating agreement with Squamish Helping Hand Society. And that the liability accrues to them, and that we don't have to sign the mortgage and it can't accrue to us.
So it's just a mortgageable lease,
Probably.
which is fine if the lender goes
With
for that.
BC guarantees.
Okay.
So I can't speak to the exact format because we haven't seen all the legal documents yet for this particular program. But again, that is generally the nature of how municipalities want to be involved in housing. We provide land or lease land. BC Housing comes to the table with the nonprofit operator. This is actually, in my opinion, one of the preferred structures.
And just the bottom line, though, is that the district doesn't show a $20 million contingent liability, which affects our borrowing power.
As far as I understand it right now, that is true, until we see the documents and make sure it's similar to other programs.
Okay.
That is a question, for sure. We have certainly made our concerns clear to Naomi that we cannot be involved in a mortgage. So they understood.
Okay, Councillor Pryor?
Yeah, well, it sounds, apart from the mortgage that we don't know about yet, it sounds totally doable. I'm totally impressed. I think it's great. And a lot of work went into it, and I really like it. I'm really happy. And give you guys credit for all that. That's a lot of digging. Good work.
And I am in the chair at the moment, so I have Councillor Elliott and Councillor Chappelle,
Thank you.
and then Councillor Hines.
So in section 5.2.2 and 5.2.3, we're talking about anticipated maintenance costs and staffing costs. And it talks about the district is budgeting slightly over $100,000 on an annual basis for ongoing maintenance for the first 5 years, and then between 80 and 85 for staffing costs for the first 5 years. Is that really the agency who will be managing the building, or is that hitting our taxpayers?
That's through the agency, and that's based on their, we've worked with CSky in the development of this, and they have some comparable buildings, so that's drawn on their existing budgets.
Can we word that slightly differently? Because it sounds like we're budgeting those expenses. But
We are the applicant, that's why actually that section already has been reviewed.
Okay, but
Yes,
to the average
appreciate that.
citizen, it might look like we're going to spend that money, $185,000.
Right, that's a good point. We can
So
work that.
we as the applicant are budgeting it, but it would be paid through the budget of the
Yeah.
operating entity.
Yeah, good point.
Thanks.
Councillor Scott, and then followed by Mayor Hines.
Thank you. That was my question was regarding long-term funding for any maintenance and deficits. And that basically covers that for any building deficiencies. So roof, anything else is going to be over that cost for sure. But what happens as far as building liability if something significant happens? Who covers the deficit with long-term liability of something like the condo syndrome or something that happens with our contractors?
Well, one thing I'll just mention in terms of the long-term maintenance and replacement of capital components is the BC Housing budgets for a replacement reserve in all of their operating budgets. So anything that's, they need to replace over time, that'll be held in a separate account for the building. And that's based on comparable buildings and anticipated costs as well.
I'm going to basically, I don't want to speak again, I'm going to take up time, but I will say that, this application is much more supportable for me than the previous application. I'm still nervous about approving, this is just a grant application, and I'm happy to support a grant application for funding, and then being able to review it. But I do expect better financial layout. To just say if $30 million, that means nothing to me. I really would like to better understand the long-term financial and have that laid out appropriately so that our taxpayer can understand it and that our council has better decision-making process in understanding our financials. I think staff has spoken incredibly, literally, it's been great hearing the updates in the project, and it's completely supportable for submitting for a grant application. I'm glad we'll have another review of it once we are either accepting or not accepting the money, but I'm happy to move this forward. This project basically having more social housing, and currently we only have 70 units of social housing, so increasing that through this grant application could be supportable by me, but without a more robust look at the financials and having that laid out, I'd be looking, I'm glad we get another go at looking at it before it's approved. But I really appreciate the amount of work staff's put into this now.
Gary?
On that note, a lot of the works financially, or 99% of the work's been done by our consultant. In fact, two consultants. One is just a cost consultant. If council wants to see the detailed capital operational budgets, I didn't attach them to the agenda because they really are sort of, last week they weren't ready. But if you want me to email them to you, I can, I'll let Robin. But we've got two sheets, one operational, one capital budget. If council wants to see them, I can send them to you.
I'll just follow up with that. Yeah, that's exactly what concerns me, is the tight timelines of applications and financials not being complete. Grant applications are amazing that they take months and months and months to prepare, and if the financials aren't robust, it's easy to say no. So yes, I would love to see that.
We've been working on them through June, July and August. So,
Mayor Hengsten?
I was going to put forward the recommended motion, and I'll speak to you.
Okay, I'll second that.
I wanted to say.
Wait.
Joe's problem. I can speak it? Yeah. Yeah, I think all of council, when this came as a rezoning application, understood that the actual final iteration of it was nowhere near what we expected, and I think the result that has come forward is exactly where we were looking to get to. I echo Councillor Blackman-Wolf's concern about adding too much market in there. This fits perfectly with the BC housing formula. This is the type of thing, exactly the type of thing they're looking for. This is the gap that we wanted to focus in on in this project. I understand creating more revenue to help pay for operational expenses, but the provincial commitment to subsidizing these, I think is really going to hit the target that we have a significant gap. The other piece that I really think is important to understand is that we really have, and Councillor Blackman-Wolf and I have talked about this lots, is we have 3 buildings that are purpose-built rental. We have some market purpose-built rental and some affordable market purpose-built rental coming, and those will help fill the gaps as well and round out our rental supply. But we're really challenged by that rental supply, and because of that, rental prices fluctuate dramatically when we have these ebbs and flows in our housing market. So this will help hopefully stabilize that a little bit. This is just one piece of it though. Can't remember who was saying it. This is just one, I think Gary was, this is just one small piece of the puzzle. This isn't the answer, the be-all and end-all to everything. This is one small piece of the puzzle. The numbers per unit on all 3 sort of spectrums, I think, are bang on where I was hoping we'd get to. So really pleased with that. I'd like to see the financials too. I suspect BC Housing wouldn't consider our application unless those are pretty good. So, but I wouldn't mind seeing those. I would like to see the park get done as soon as possible. I think that's long overdue in that neighborhood. So if we can move that forward more quickly, once we have some certainty on well, we're going to build that park anyway. So regardless, I think we need to move forward on that. But really pleased with where this has gotten to, and I do think the next step is really figuring out that the model that's going to deliver sort of managed housing, whether it's a nonprofit or a housing authority. That's the really big next decision, the next really big decision on that front, figuring out how to deliver that and administer that, I should say. And that's not just for us. I think there needs to be a comprehensive, inclusive, collaborative approach to administering some of our housing needs in the community. So good job, guys. Really happy where it's gotten. And we all knew this BC Housing, the new government was going to bring in a different program, and we were kind of waiting for the nuts and bolts of that so we can react to it appropriately. I think you guys did a great job.
Yeah, and I would just say too that, you know, as a seconder, I definitely support moving forward in this, and this is a long time coming. We've been working on this for the better part of the last 4 years, was starting with the housing task force, but then moving into a staff phase over the last 2.5 years and engaging consultants and laying the groundwork. I don't think we would be this far along in the BC housing application process if we hadn't done that. And I also think it's very important to point out that we've managed to do this without incurring major additional taxpayer liability. We funded most of this work out of our affordable housing reserve, which has come from community amenity contributions from developers. So there's no net impact to the taxpayer, but we are meeting the needs, housing needs of people in our community. So I think that this project, projects always take a few iterations till you get to the right one, but I see that as a strength. And I think that the final project will be very exciting and also deliver on multiple things and has the potential as far as the youth hub and other needs in the community. But yes, definitely on the park, let's get that done ASAP. I'd like to see that done very quickly. So I have Councillor Race and then Councillor Pryor.
Thank you. Actually, I put my hand up before the motion is on the table, so I just, because I didn't mention it before when I was speaking, I was sort of more concerned in trying to get my head around the numbers and liability and so forth. But I did want to say that I think this is a good proposal, and I agree with the mix. I'm actually was never a fan of the townhouses. This makes a lot more sense to me. And the question of whether we ever add market housing to this, I'd say that at the moment, to me, there is no incentive to do that. If BC Housing is prepared to cover the deficiency or the deficit, why would we bother? And however, if they balk at that, then certainly that's a discussion we can have as a way of dealing with that deficit that might arise. So I think we can put that off. But I think generally I support this, and as I say, there's one more decision, I guess, that's critical, and that'll come probably to the next council, I guess. But that to me is the final critical decision. So it's certainly supportive at this point.
Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you got BC Housing or whoever it is and a backstop any overruns, I mean, really how can you go wrong? And like Jason says, it's been worked on with the affordable housing and all that stuff that we did 4 years ago with a mature council and a mature staff. I'm really impressed with this. The big thrill, if I live long enough, will be when we own it. And so that building will be owned by the district one day, and that revenue will be coming in. And you know what? It'll fund another unit just like that. And it'll self-perpetuate itself. And that's the biggest success that I see in these type of things. It's like the seniors housing, So anyway, I'm totally impressed. I think it looks great.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. I have Councillor Kent and then Mayor Heinzman.
I just wanted to say kudos to staff and to the consultant. I love the way this has evolved and very supportive.
I just wanted to add one more comment about the siting. Much more pleased with the siting of the site. It doesn't feel as cluttered. I like that it's on the sort of the north side looking south predominantly now. I think that's better, just the better overall layout of just from a fundamental point of view, I think it's a better project as well.
Thank you, Councillor.
I'm going to support the motion. I think the proposal looks great. I also want to just say thank you to the nonprofits that you've been working with, because more than a year ago they came and said, this is what affordable looks like in our community, and it was way down at these rents. And I really appreciate their advocacy and that they stuck with us, because I know they've helped influence this proposal. So good on them. We still have a long way to go, but this is a good start.
All right, good discussion, everybody. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And then we have a second motion. Well, I guess, were they just done and that's the same? I need my process first.
I did them all.
Yeah, okay. So we carry both. It's going to be brought forward to our regular meeting tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Seeing nothing else on the agenda, I'll seek a motion to terminate meeting. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Pryor. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.